I am very, very pleased to introduce Asti Jackson. Dr. Jackson is an associate research scientist in the Department of Psychiatry, which I think in Yale is kind of like an assistant professor. They start people out Yale and Harvard seems to add another level of steps. So yeah, and so I just got to know Asti a little bit through the T-Course meetings and was just really impressed with her work. So I was really glad to have her come give a talk to our group because her interests are just so overlapping with our interests. So yeah, so really excited to see her talk. A little bit of a background about Asti. So she has a bachelor's from Georgia State University. She has a PhD from VCU in pharmacology. And one of the things that's very impressive about Asti is that she has had, I think she kind of does like 3 different areas of science. And so I know during her PhD, she focused on preclinical models and was very successful doing that. But then she shifted doing a postdoctoral fellowship at Yale and working as part of the T-Course at Yale. She shifted into human research, and I was familiar with some of the observational research that she has done with adolescents using their cohorts over there at Yale. But she's also have been doing some human laboratory research as well. So really a triple threat here. And some really, really exciting findings on the intersection of flavors and other product characteristics that she's been recently publishing on that she's going to present today. So we're really excited to have Dr. Asti Jackson.
Thank you so much. And I'll just jump into it. So I'm Asti Jackson. Thank you so much, Adam, for that great introduction. And today I'd just like to tell you about my work that focuses on the impact of e-cigarette product characteristics on adolescent e-cigarette use behaviors. And so the studies I'm going to present today, they're funded by the Yale T-Course, and I don't have any disclosures to report. So here's just a picture of the Yale T-Course team that heavily contributed to the work I'm going to present here today. They molded me and groomed me. I really love these guys. And this team is led by Suchitra, Krishna, and Saran. So in 2018, the then FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb had considered adolescent e-cigarette use an epidemic. And the recent NYTS survey from 2020 suggested that still 3.6 million adolescents are using e-cigarettes. So these are high school and middle school students. And we know that e-cigarette use exposes adolescents to nicotine, and that nicotine has a negative impact on the developing brain. This is a cause for concern and it's problematic. And also, there are studies that have shown that e-cigarette use in adolescence has been associated with future use of cigarettes. So these are some of the reasons why we're really trying to understand why do adolescents use e-cigarettes? What is appealing about e-cigarettes to adolescents? And one of these things is flavors. So we've seen in previous studies that flavors are one of the top reasons why adolescents actually use e-cigarettes. And we know that e-cigarettes come in thousands of different flavors. But among those flavors, the top 3 typically are candy and fruit and menthol flavors that adolescents prefer to use. And we also know that e-cigarettes come in a wide range of device types. There are some that are different sizes and different shapes, and some are open systems where you can buy your e-liquid separately. And buying this e-liquid separately, you can pick any type of e-liquid with any flavor or nicotine concentration you're interested in. And there are some that are closed systems that are pre-filled pods that already come with e-liquids in them. And so we know that all of these factors contribute to different characteristics for all the different devices. And so a study done here at Yale led by Grace Kong, we saw that looking at the Juul specifically and asking among e-cigarette people that have used Juul in the past month, we noticed that some of the reasons they like the Juul was because of the size of the Juul and the shape of the Juul. So these product characteristics were really important for adolescents. And related to that, we also realized that adolescents also like the Juul specifically because the ability to conceal this device. This device is small and it fit into their hand, and also because it has these pre-filled pods, the e-liquids inside them, the vapor is very discreet, so they can easily hide from their parents and teachers. So we really wanted to consider the fact that different device types have these different characteristics and that really can appeal to youth, and also just the flavors and e-liquids in general are appealing. So these are two aspects I'm going to focus on in my talk today, but there are multiple other reasons why adolescents are using e-cigarettes. And two techniques I'm going to talk about today are just the human lab studies, so the experimental paradigm we conducted that looked at the impact of green apple flavor. And so for that study, we recruited 16 and 20-year-olds who had used e-cigarettes in the past month, at least 10 days in the past month. And they underwent 4 laboratory sessions, and these sessions were directed e-cigarette puffing bout sessions they underwent. And I'm also going to talk to you about some of our survey data that we collect from high school students in Connecticut. And for that study, we're going to talk about alcohol flavors and also e-cigarette devices that they use on school grounds. But first, we're going to talk about the green apple experiment with the experimental paradigm. And so as I mentioned earlier, e-liquids are available in over 15,000 flavors with different ingredients and different names. But specifically, menthol flavor has been shown to improve the liking and reduce aversiveness of nicotine in e-cigarettes. So menthol is a well-studied compound. It's been shown to have these pharmacological effects that are related to, that may be related to these actual results we see with e-cigarettes. And these pharmacological effects are when the menthol associates with the trip receptors and induces cooling effects and also analgesic effects, analgesic properties. However, I mentioned that there are thousands of different flavors available with different ingredients and things of that nature that may not actually have the same pharmacological impact as menthol. So we wanted to explore what would be the impact of a different flavor that wasn't like menthol, but also another popular flavor. And we talked about I mentioned how green apple flavor or just fruit flavors in general are really popular among adolescents. So for this study, we chose to use the green apple flavor because it is popular, it is a fruit flavor. And in this study, we actually used commercially available e-liquids. So when we purchased these e-liquids for the green apple flavor, we made sure that it did not contain any menthol. So we don't believe that it has any of the pharmacological impact that menthol would have. And this is the main outcome from the Yale T-Course 1.0. And so for this study, we wanted to see the interactive effects of menthol and green apple in combination with 2 concentrations of nicotine. So we used 6 milligrams of nicotine and 12 milligrams of nicotine, so a higher and a lower concentration. Just for context, this study took place in 2017, and this is before the Juul really took over the market with 5% nicotine salt concentrations, which is about 59 milligrams per milliliter. So at the time, 12 milligrams was on the higher end, but we know the market has changed tremendously. But we do still think these results are still valid and can really add to the literature and to the current market today. And the reason why we chose these 2 concentrations of nicotine, because our previous studies have shown that 12 milligrams of nicotine was more irritating and more harsh than 6 milligrams of nicotine. So we hypothesized that menthol would reduce the harshness of 12 milligrams of nicotine, and in turn, that would allow this combination of menthol and 12 milligrams of nicotine to have positive reinforcement or to be liked more than 12 milligrams of nicotine in combination with green apple. And we also, as I mentioned, that 12 milligrams was more aversive, so 6 milligrams was less aversive. So we hypothesized it would be more liked because it's less aversive than 12. And then we also know that fruit flavors in general are just liked. So the additive likeness of each of these components separately, we felt that we have an additive effect for the positive reinforcement. So we hypothesized that green apple in combination with 6 milligrams of nicotine will be liked more than 6 milligrams of nicotine in combination with menthol. So that was the hypothesis that was driving this experiment while we used these 2 nicotine concentrations. And so once again, we recruited 16 to 20-year-olds who had used e-cigarettes in the past month. they used that at least 10 days in the past month. And to just verify they actually had nicotine in their system, they were exposed to nicotine, we collected their urine cotinine levels. And the urine cotinine levels had to be higher than 150 nanograms per milliliter to be a part of this study. And at the time, at the bottom, you see the e-cigarette that we use. It was called a V2 e-cigarette. So this e-cigarette is considered a vape pen. It's a refillable vape pen. And at the moment, it is not, it's been discontinued. I think of this as actually probably in 2019, it was discontinued. But even though it's discontinued, this vape pen has a wattage of about 5.5, which is somewhat similar to the power to the devices that are on the market now, some of the pod devices. So this is an example of a low power device in our study, which we still has relevance because there are low power devices on the market today as well. And then for all the e-liquids, just to make sure we control for PG and VG levels, we had at a 50-50 ratio for all the e-liquids used in this study. And so we recruited 49 individuals. They were randomized to either receive 6 milligrams of nicotine or 12 milligrams of nicotine. And the first three laboratory sessions they underwent were different based on the flavor they were experiencing. So one lab session, they may experience unflavored e-liquids, the next one menthol, and another laboratory session would have been green apple flavor. And their flavor exposure was in a random order for each person. And so among these 49 participants, we saw that the majority of them were non-Hispanic white, mostly male, and about 19 years of age. And we also assessed their menthol cigarette use, and we saw that 18.4% had used menthol cigarettes in the past month. And here are the vaping chambers that we actually do our experiments in. So you see that plexiglass there, we took this picture in the middle of COVID. So this is our COVID restrictions and requirements we have now, this plexiglass. But I mentioned that the study was in 2017, so that glass was not there. So these chambers are specifically made to remove odors. And we have access to these chambers through our collaboration with Dr. Barry Green. This is where we conduct all of our studies, and this is where the studies were conducted for the Green Apple study. And so during the lab sessions, they undergo 3 different puffing bouts, and each of these puffing bouts contain 10 puffs, and each puff is about 3 seconds in duration. It's 3 seconds in duration, and also in between puffs, there's a 30-second interval. And so before and after these puffing bouts, they were given assessments to assess their subjective effects of their experience with the puffing bouts. And so the primary outcome for this study, we assessed the liking of e-cigarette taste, and we used the labeled hedonic scale. So this scale, -100 corresponds with most disliked, and 100 corresponds with most liked. This is a bipolar categorical scale, and all of the semantic labelings, their positions were determined and validated by our collaborator, Dr. Barry Green. So this is the primary outcome we used for the Green Apple study. And here are the results. So on the y-axis, we see that we have the labeled hedonic scale. So the -100 again corresponds to most disliked, and the 100 at the top corresponds to most liked. And on that scale, labeled hedonic scale, we're assessing disliking and liking of e-cigarette taste. On the x-axis, we have the different flavors. So we have unflavored e-liquids, menthol flavored e-liquids, and green apple e-liquids. And then we have in black, the black bars are corresponding to 6 milligrams of nicotine, and the gray bars correspond to 12 milligrams of nicotine. And what we did, we saw that 6 milligrams of nicotine was like more than 12 milligrams of nicotine, and also that green apple was like more than, the taste of green apple was like more than menthol and unflavored e-liquids, but there was no difference between menthol and unflavored e-liquids in liking. Interestingly, we did not witness any interactive effects between nicotine and flavor, which is what we proposed, but we did not actually witness those things. So separately, 6 milligrams was liked more than 12, and separately, green apple was liked more than menthol and unflavored e-liquids. And so for this study, I mentioned we had 4 lab sessions. So the first 3 were directed puffing bout sessions, and the 4th one was an ad lib session. So people were still randomized into their nicotine group, either to receive 6 milligrams of nicotine or 12 milligrams of nicotine. But for the ad lib session, they were exposed to all 3 flavors. So the unflavored e-liquid, the menthol flavored e-liquid, and also the green apple e-liquid. And during this session, they were left in the room by themselves with those 3 e-cigarettes with those corresponding flavors within their nicotine concentration. And this session was recorded. And so for each of the e-cigarettes, we actually color coded them so that the coders will be able to tell the difference between the e-cigarettes. Because for this session, we actually recorded the number of puffs they took for each e-cigarette. And also we separated the colors so that the participants were able to know that these are separate, different e-cigarettes. So we did that for 60 minutes. The session was recorded. And prior to the ad lib session, we actually had them to take 1 puff of each e-cigarette before they actually started the lab session. And so in figure A are the number of puff results. So the y-axis is in looking at the number of puffs. This is square root transformed. And the x-axis is looking at the flavors, so unflavored, menthol, and green apple. And we see that once again for both A and panel B, 6 milligrams of nicotine corresponds to the black bars, and 12 milligrams of nicotine corresponds to the gray bar. And there was no effect of nicotine concentration, but we saw that for the number of puffs, that there were higher number of puffs for the green apple e-liquid compared to the menthol and unflavored, which corresponds with them liking green apple more than menthol unflavored e-liquids. And also for the ad lib session, we actually measured the amount of e-liquid they used before and after the session. And we saw that similar to the number of puffs data, that the green apple e-liquid, more the green apple e-liquid was used in comparison to menthol and unflavored e-liquids. So those were the results for the green apple study. Next, I'm going to just transition to the survey data where we looked at the alcohol flavors. So just a brief background about the survey studies. So we've actually been collecting data for Connecticut high schools since 2014. And these are school-wide surveys in Southeast Connecticut, and where we monitor perceptions and use in tobacco use behaviors. And so these surveys we target surveys over really quickly. We have the ability to edit them and to add new and innovative questions that we hope that can inform the work of national surveys. And our rates of tobacco product use are similar to national surveys. And we've collected this data for 6 waves so far. Our 7th wave would have been spring 2020. We were actually, the week that the pandemic started was the week we're going to actually go and start surveying schools. So we would have had 2020 data had we have been a little quicker, but who would have predicted COVID would have happened? But we're working diligently now to work with the schools to see if there's a possibility to do another wave of data. Some of the schools here in Connecticut have a hybrid format where they're at home, where they're in school, and some are just all the way at home. So we're trying to figure out a ways that we could possibly assess the students for this year. And so typically we assess at least 4 to 8 schools throughout the study. And so these schools in Connecticut are broken down into district reference groups. And district reference groups are grouped by socioeconomic status. And so for our studies, whether we do 4 schools or up to 8 schools, we make sure we get schools that represent a different socioeconomic status or DRG group. So we can have as much diversity as possible to really get a full understanding of e-cigarette use for different types of children. And so once again, this is a whole school-wide survey. We typically pick a class that all the kids are taking, whether that be English class or social studies or one of the major classes they have to take, so we can make sure we're surveying all the students. And the survey is anonymous, so it's a self-generating identification code. And so this identification code asks questions about different letters of their name and different letters corresponding to their birthday. So it's very unique to them, and it doesn't change over the year, which is great. So we're able to actually match data so we can actually understand tobacco use changes, behavior changes over time, which is really awesome. And so we know the e-liquids come in multiple flavors, and using that survey data, we want to understand alcohol flavor use and compare that and the association with alcohol consumption, because we know e-liquids come in multiple different flavors and different names and different ingredients, and some of these are actually named after alcohol beverages, such as pina colada and strawberry daiquiri. But it isn't clear there is actual association between using these e-liquids and actual consumption of alcohol beverages among adolescents. And this is a problem, and this is a big issue to explore, because adolescent use of e-cigarettes is pretty high, and alcohol beverage use of adolescents is high as well. So, and we also see that there are studies that suggest that alcohol use is associated with individuals that use e-cigarettes, and also binge drinking, which is a problematic alcohol use behavior, is also associated with adolescents that use e-cigarettes compared to those that don't. However, these studies didn't explore which components of e-cigarettes could possibly be driving this association. It wasn't clear, was it just because e-cigarettes contain nicotine, or was it because of the flavors of e-liquids? And so for this particular study, we wanted to understand the relationship between the flavors that e-cigarettes contain and their relationship to alcohol drinking. And specifically, we wanted to focus on flavors named after alcohol beverages. And so to do that, we use our data from spring of 2015, where we actually assessed 8 Connecticut high schools. And so for our analytic sample, we had e-cigarette ever users. So they responded to yes to having ever used an e-cigarette, even just 1 or 2 puffs. And we asked the e-cigarette ever users which flavor of e-liquid do they prefer to use. And so here are all the response options, ranging from mint to spice to coffee. And also we asked about alcohol use, whether in parentheses we have like pina colada, strawberry daiquiri, and bourbon and rum and brandy for examples. And so this was a select that all that applies question. So if anyone selected alcohol alone or alcohol in combination with other flavors, they were considered to have preferred alcohol use, alcohol beverage named e-liquids. If any individuals selected anything else besides alcohol flavors, they were considered to not have preferred alcohol flavor e-liquids. And we also asked them about their past month use. So there are a couple of ways to assess alcohol use. They're common. And so typically you ask about the past 30 days use and how many of those days they actually use or drink alcohol beverages. So we asked that specific question. And also it's really important to assess binge drinking, because binge drinking is a problematic alcohol use behavior where individuals, for men, the standard is 5 or more drinks in a 2 hours period. And for women, it's 4 or more drinks in a 2-hour period. And binge drinking has been associated with unattended injuries, such as alcohol poisoning and car crashes, and also some health effects like heart disease. So it's a really important particular alcohol use behavior to assess, especially in adolescence, where binge drinking actually is really high, especially among college students and things of that nature. So we wanted to make sure we assess these 2 types of behavior, just general past month alcohol use and also problematic binge drinking use. So we use these 2 questions. The first one, during the past 30 days, on how many days did you drink 1 or more alcohol beverages? And the second question we use to assess for binge drinking, we asked, during the past 30 days, how often did you have 5 or more drinks on 1 occasion? And we decided to use the term occasion instead of 2-hour period, because we thought that occasion would be a better term that kids would be able to conceptualize instead of thinking about when they spent 2 hours drinking. And so we categorized individuals based on their responses to these 2 questions into 3 categories. So the first one was for individuals that had reported using alcohol in the past month. They actually responded negatively to the binge drinking question. So we categorized them as past month alcohol users with no binge drinking. And then a second category were individuals that responded positively to the past month binge drinking question. So they were considered to have binge drink alcohol in the past month. The last one is where individuals, they responded negatively to the questions in assessing past month use at all. So therefore they were considered no past month alcohol users. So we have these 3 categories amongst our e-cigarette ever users. We want to understand association. And so of the sample that we surveyed, and this is from 2015, we saw that 1,311 adolescents actually had ever used e-cigarettes at that time. And so here is, so I remember we asked about e-liquid flavors, and so here are the top flavors that were assessed by adolescents. The top flavors are assessed, and these are the top flavors that were actually endorsed by adolescents, excuse me. And so for fruit flavor, we saw that 49.4% of every users actually preferred fruit flavor, 25.5% had preferred using candy flavor e-liquids, and 20.8% prefer using vanilla, 12.5 prefer using mint, and 8.5 alcohol flavor e-liquids. And because the use of fruit, the preference for fruit and candy e-liquids was so high, and also I mentioned this is a select all that applies question, so there was a lot of overlap, we decided to do a chi-square analysis to understand if there was a relationship between using alcohol named e-liquids and also fruit named e-liquids in a separate chi-square looking at alcohol named e-liquids and candy flavored e-liquids. And we saw that there was a correlation between those two different other e-liquids as well. So I mentioned that in our e-cigarette ever user group, we had 1,311 kids that ever used e-cigarettes. 8.5 of those actually endorsed preferring using alcohol flavors. And Emily raised her hand, I don't know. And so among those individuals that actually prefer using alcohol flavors, we assess their frequency of past month alcohol use, and we saw that the majority of them actually had drunk alcohol, binge drink alcohol in the past month. So then we did a multinomial logistic regression model. And so we included fruit and candy into the model because, as I mentioned earlier, there was an association between using these e-liquids and also alcohol named e-liquids. And we also looked at putting demographic variables into the model, such as age, sex, and race, because these have been shown to have a positive association with past month alcohol use too as well. So our outcomes, we were looking at our reference group was no past month alcohol drinking compared to past month alcohol use and also past month binge drinking. And we saw that fruit flavor was associated with past month binge drinking, but the association between past month binge drinking and alcohol and preferring to use alcohol named e-liquids was actually stronger. And so we're really excited to see some of these findings and we're really interested in understanding what they can mean in a larger sample size. And could they be replicated? And so, for the flavor summary, so essentially for the experimental study, we saw that green apple flavor increased the liking of e-cigarette taste compared to menthol flavor and compared to unflavored e-liquids. And we also, as I mentioned, 18.4% of that sample were using menthol in the past month. We wanted to see was there any impact or a relationship was there any effect of menthol smoking status? And we did not see any effect of menthol smoking status on our results. And we also didn't see any interactive effects between nicotine concentrations and things of that nature, which we predicted, but we did not see those. We just saw that green apple was liked more, and the number of puffs were higher for green apple, and the amount of e-liquid use was higher compared to the other flavors that were in that study. And then we also saw that preference for using alcohol named e-liquids was associated with past month binge drinking, which is a problematic binge drinking behavior. And so essentially, these are the flavor results that we saw, and it's just really interesting that we saw these results in the flavors and whatnot. So, and for the last part of this talk, I just want to talk about the more recent paper I have for the e-cigarette devices used on school grounds, where we also used the survey data. So in 2020, we saw that the National Youth Tobacco Survey suggested that 19.6% of high school students, so about 3 million students were current users of e-cigarettes. And so for this survey, they actually divided and asked about device types. And so some of the categories they used were pre-filled pods or cartridges. So about 48.5% of those high school students that were used in the past month used cartridges. 26.5% used disposable e-cigarettes, and 14.8% used tanks. But for our study, so I mentioned that we've been doing surveys since 2014, and also we've actually been collecting data on e-cigarette devices since 2017. And we use slightly different categories that we feel that are more informative, maybe more informative than national data sets about e-cigarette devices. And so there's a paper under review by Kristen Bowl in our group, and that we kind of assessed and looked at different, cross-sectionally looked at the different e-cigarette device use over the past 3 years, so 2017, 2018, and 2019. So the navy blue bars represent the 2018 data for each of these different device types. The blue and white horizontal bars represent 2018 data for each of the devices, and the gray bar represents the 2019 data. And so we assess disposables, vape pens, mods, jewels, and other pod devices that weren't jewels, such as the Soren or the Fix. And so we assessed this past month use of these specific device types among those that indicated that they used the e-cigarette in the past month. And we saw that for disposals, we saw that there's an increase from 2017 and 2018. We also saw that for vape pens, there was an increase from 2018 and 2019 of the device used. And for mods, we saw that there's a decrease from 2017. From each year, there's a decrease. And now in 2019, it's also decreased for mods as well. And then for Juul, we saw there's an increase from 2017 to 2018, but there's a plateau between 2018 and 2019 with our local high school data. We did not assess other pods in 2017, but in 2018, we saw that there was a decrease. In 2019, we saw there's a decrease from 2018. And so it's very interesting to see that adolescents are using a wide variety of devices, and there's a difference between the years, and also, the landscape of e-cigarette devices changes constantly, so it could definitely inform why these categories may have changed. And so since they're using multiple different devices, there have also been studies that have shown that adolescents may be actually using their e-cigarette devices on school grounds. And specifically, some of the studies that are cited here looked at Twitter posts and YouTube videos, and they've specifically looked at the Juul device. But given there are so many different devices that kids could be using, we wanted to really understand what are the use rates on campus, school grounds for other e-cigarette devices outside of Juul. Because we know that there are other devices outside of Juul that are becoming really popular, other pod devices that are available. So we want to really assess and get a full scope of what's going on with adolescent e-cigarette use, and not just focus on one particular brand or product. And also, we know that we weren't sure exactly what the specific locations individuals were using at school. We wanted to get this information to definitely help inform school regulation. So to do that, we used our spring 2019 data, so our most recent data set, and looked at 6 Connecticut high schools. And so here is how we actually assess, these are devices we actually assess. So here are the pictures and the actual, the wording we use for each of the devices. So we assessed the Juul, we assessed for the other non-Juul pod devices such as Soren or Fix, for vape pens, for disposables and cigarettes, and also mod e-cigarette devices. And so we assess demographic information such as age, sex, race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. And for each device, we asked about their past month use for each of these devices. If they used that device in the past month, we asked them, did they actually use that device at school in the past month? If they say yes to that question, then we assess where in school did they use in the past month. And was it in the classroom? Was it in the bathroom, in the hallway or stairwell? Was it outside but on school grounds, like behind a building or a sports field in the parking lot? Or was it in other places that we didn't actually mention? So we're interested in understanding their responses to these questions. And so just for our 2019 data overall, we saw that 29.7% of our total sample had endorsed past month use of e-cigarettes. And if you look at the NYTS 2019 e-cigarette use rates, our rates are similar to theirs. And so for 2019, we saw among the past month e-cigarette users, individuals that use e-cigarettes in the past month, person first language, we saw that the Juul use, 82.7% used the Juul. 36.6% used other pod devices other than a Juul, such as a Soaring or a Fix. And we also saw that 45% of them used a vape pen. And 21.4% used disposable e-cigarettes, and 20.5% used a mod. And so overall, we saw that 45% of the youth who are currently using e-cigarettes reporting actually using that device on school grounds, which is a little less than half of the students that were past month e-cigarette users using e-cigarettes in the past month. And so specifically for each device, we saw that 45.7% of those that were using a Juul in the past month actually used a Juul on school grounds. We saw that 41.3% of pod users used on school grounds, pods other than Juul. We saw that 34.7% used a vape pen at school. And for those that use the disposable e-cigarette, we saw that 38.3% actually used on school grounds. And for the mods, we saw that 27.3% used on school grounds. And so we did 5 separate binary logistic regression models for each of the devices, because we wanted to understand what predicts e-cigarette use, the school use of these particular devices. And we saw that, including demographic variables and past month use frequency, we saw that greater past month use frequency of each device was the only thing that actually predicted e-cigarette use in school. And so we also wanted to understand the locations in which they use e-cigarettes. So here we see that in the blue bar, we have the Juul. The orange bar, we have other pod devices other than Juul. For the gray, we have vape pen. For the yellow, we have disposable e-cigarettes. For the navy blue, we have mods. And we assess, like I mentioned, the bathroom, on the x-axis, the bathroom, the outside places other than, that's still on school grounds, classroom, the hallway, and other places that we didn't explicitly mention. This is an open-ended question. And we saw that the majority of people were using their e-cigarette devices in the bathroom. What is interesting and important to know is that they also use it in the classroom. And so for these 6 schools that we actually surveyed for 2019, they all had e-cigarette policies in place that had punitive consequences for using e-cigarettes, such as being suspended or actually being ticketed by the police. But regardless, and these policies have been in place since 2018. So they were in place in 2018. We surveyed them in 2019. They're still used in the classrooms. And we've done subsequent focus groups in the fall of 2019 where we just kind of asked kids about their e-cigarette use. And we've heard stories about them having their e-cigarettes in their sleeve and kind of vaping like that, or also vaping and just holding the vapor inside their mouths for long periods of time. So it's very, and also the smells are, very fruity and things like that. So teachers may not recognize it could possibly be an e-cigarette and not like some candy they're using. So regardless of the rules, interesting, just regardless of these rules that have been put in place, it's not clear these rules are working or they're actually being implemented, because they are still used even in classrooms, which is a very open place to be using an e-cigarette device when it should be banned. And so for the results, we saw that 45% of youth who are currently using e-cigarettes, reported using that device on school grounds. And that we saw that at the time of this survey in 2019, that Juul use was more frequently reported at school than mod use, which makes sense because, the mod is a more bulkier device to use, and it'd be harder to hide at school. And then also the bathroom was the most frequently reported use place, which makes sense too, because it's like a very discreet place to use e-cigarette. And that greater past month use frequency was associated with use of each specific device on school grounds. And there have been studies that have shown that greater past month use frequency is also associated with dependence. So there may be a relationship there between dependence, increased dependence, and using your device on school grounds. And so overall for this talk, in conclusion, is that there's a lot of restrictions and concern about access to fruity flavors, but it's important to understand that e-liquids, there are 3 different, concepts you would think about with e-liquids. So there's the naming of the e-liquids, the ingredients of the e-liquids, and also the perception when the user uses the e-cigarette, the e-liquids. And so with the restriction on fruity flavors, it just makes, we have to be very clear that we're also regulating the actual naming of these e-liquid products, because when they're named after products that are other drugs, such as alcohol, it can definitely probably influence their use of those products. And also just that e-cigarettes aren't just, flavors are not just impacting e-cigarette use, they're also impacting use of other substances such as alcohol, which is really important to think about as we move forward. And the more effective school-based tobacco control strategies. As I mentioned, the e-cigarette policies were in place at the time of this study and had been in place for a while, but it wasn't clear whether these policies actually been implemented or they actually were successful, or maybe punitive ways of reducing e-cigarette use isn't the way to go for kids nowadays. So it's thinking about better ways to actually employ policies to reduce e-cigarette use is really important. And so just for next steps for me, so as Adam mentioned, I do a couple of different things. So I work with animals during my PhD, and then I transitioned to working with humans and experimental studies in adolescents, and also the survey work in Connecticut. And I recently got a Baccalaureate Science K Award that is funded by the FDA and NIDA. And so I want to make another leap or transition again. So I want this K to focus on adult smokers. And I wanted to understand the relationship with adult smokers and the use of e-cigarettes as a potential harm reduction tool. Just because it's multiple ways to think about the e-cigarette conversation, right? We could think about the adolescent situation where they're using, and it may make them dependent on cigarettes, but there could be some vitality of this product with adult smokers. And I really want to make sure I have a balanced understanding of e-cigarette use and nicotine use in general. So I really wanted my K to focus on adult smokers. And also just some of the health effects. So we know that EVALI was very prevalent in 2019 and the end of 2019. And so because at the time of EVALI, I wanted to make sure I included some health effects into my K, just in case, it wasn't clear what it really was from, but now there's a lot of studies saying it's from vitamin acetate and things of that nature, but it's really important to understand, would there be potential health effects? So looking at lung spirometry and things of that nature, it's really important. So I wanted to include that in my K as well. And also toxicity. So we don't know a lot about e-cigarettes. We do know a lot about cigarettes, but it's interesting to see what the impact of e-cigarette and cigarette use would be, or the transition, or how that decrease or increase some of these well-known toxicants that are from cigarettes. So I wanted that to be a focus as well. And last but not least, my K predominantly, well, it focuses on African Americans. And we know that tobacco, African Americans disproportionately are impacted by tobacco-related diseases. And I think I just really wanted my K to focus on this as well. So these are 4 different aspects, 4 different parts of the e-cigarette conversation I'm going to delve into with my K award. So this is going to be another transition. And I think it's really important to understand how can e-cigarettes be used as a harm reduction tool. And I really appreciate having been on both sides of the conversation at this point. I just hope that my research grows and I just continue to learn more and just put out good science. So yeah, and that's the end of my talk. So let me know if you have any questions, and I appreciate you all for listening.
Thank you, Asti. Great. Asti, great talk. Wonderful. I think this is a new format for us in terms of using the Zoom webinar function. So with regards to questions, which we have time for, if you want to ask, maybe let me just have Emily pull, Emily, can you come online and suggest how people can ask questions?
So there's different ways. You guys can go through the chat portion, the Q&A box, or if you raise your hand, I'll make you a panelist and your video and your audio will show up and you can talk to Dr. Jackson directly. I don't see a hand up just yet.
Did you say that there was a hand earlier?
Oh, that was me testing to see how you see.
I was like, oh, Emily, why are you asking?
Well,
I'm testing it.
The positive feedback coming in, people saying really interesting talk.
Mm-hmm.
That was a lot of research. It sure was.
Yeah.
Well, as people get their thoughts together for questions.
Oh, we have a hand up.
There we go, Dr. McConnell.
So I'll just, rejoining. Oops.
Yeah, I think
there we go.
Talk.
Yep.
There you go.
You can unmute Rob. There we go.
Okay. think he's unmuted.
Yep.
So thanks, Asti. That was really a nice. That was really a nice talk. Could you tell us, so that I saw your green apple flavoring paper. Is there? Why did you pick green apple? Is there something special about green apple, and is there any sort of particular reason to? Any thoughts about whether it would be useful to follow up on green apple specifically in population studies, or if that was just you know, a convenient example of a flavor? You may have covered that and I might have missed it. But.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, so we actually pick green apples. So the ELT course, we have animal studies and we have a chemist on board. And so some of our other studies were actually using green apple flavor because some of the ingredients that creates green apple, they're very simple and basic flavoring. So, and we also know that sweet and fruity flavors are very popular among adolescents. And we also knew that the particular vendor we went to get our e-liquids didn't have menthol in it. So for a lot of reasons, it was a flavor we were already pretty much studying at the ELT course anyway. And it's a fruity flavor, and it was been conducted on multiple levels with animals and with our chemist, and so it was just an easier flavor to kind of dwell into, because I think we were going to also think about strawberry flavor and and we also want to use commercialized e-liquids too, but we didn't want to use something that had too many components in it, just in case, because it just gets kind of wild a little bit with so what is it like, is it, just because it's not menthol, it may have still a cooling effect, because all menthol is just a pharmacological agent that acts on the trip receptors. So we wanted to kind of use as few flavors as possible that we kind of knew what they would possibly be doing, and green apple was a little easier to pick, one of the simpler flavors to pick actually.
Do you use green apple in your population surveys?
So how our categories are, we just say fruit flavors, and we use it as like an example. Like in our example, we don't actually specifically ask about each fruit flavor. So we'll say fruit flavor, candy flavors, alcohol flavors in that way. We don't ask specifically about each fruit flavor, but we're thinking about kind of shifting towards being more specific.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we have a few questions. So one from Julia Chensanki. So she says she's very interesting K project, and she's wondering whether any of your K aims are about using e-cigarettes to reduce cigarette smoking related health disparities among African American, especially as they relate to menthol cigarette smoking.
Yeah. So is this Julia? Who said this? Is Julia? Who's this comment?
It's on the chat.
Oh, sorry. I'm like, where is it? Yeah, because I'm like, I'm not think I follow Julie on Twitter. But yeah, so make sure I'm saying her name right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so essentially for the K, I wanted to so as most people probably know, that e-cigarette, African Americans are underrepresented in e-cigarette research and among a lot of different research aspects. So I wanted to focus on African Americans for that reason, and just because it could be a viable option for harm reduction. But my K doesn't necessarily focus on menthol smokers. It takes into account that African Americans are more likely going to be smoking menthol cigarettes. So for my e-liquids, for my study, I'm going to have an option between tobacco or menthol e-liquids. But the K isn't, I wanted to focus on African Americans, not a flavor specifically. So whatever meets their needs is what I want to focus. And also have Pebbles Fagan on my K, so she's going to be able to definitely help me to figure out what's the best way to engage that community.
Okay. Jimiha really enjoyed your talk. Sabrina Smiley as well. So do you see the question from Jessica Barrington Trimis? So you made a comment that we need to worry not only about flavors, but about the naming of flavors, citing alcohol related. I'm wondering if you think it's really the name per se, or if it's the actual flavor. Her initial thinking is that it's more about the flavor than about the naming convention. She's getting at more specifically is what your recommendation to the FDA would be. Should it be to have restriction on flavor names or ban all flavors besides tobacco?
Oh yeah, I think I want all of it. Yeah, I want all the bans. But and that's what my thought was. But it's also this balance between adult smokers, right? This also appeals to them too. So with a balanced focus. But yeah, so I think so we actually looked at some research with flavors, alcohol named e-liquid flavors. Some of them don't. I mean, there's not clear evidence that actually even contain any alcohol in itself. So it's just actually named after a beverage that could be appealing to adolescents. And I think that there's some other data with like e-liquids are named as like cotton candy or look similar to other products, like the labeling and the packaging are really important too. So I do think it's both and. That also the naming, we have to really regulate how we're going to name these flavors. Do you want to actually, who are we trying to attract, and also the actual ingredients or the perception of the flavors themselves, but in a way that is balanced, that can help just in case if adult smokers want to use it for harm reduction. So it's complicated, but yeah, both.
Okay, and then we have a question from Dr. Sussman, Steve Sussman. Are you looking where teens are vaping outside of school? The most popular locations for smoking is the youth bathroom. However, it appears vaping might be going on in more public places, controlling for the pandemic. Any comments on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we're actually working with the schools now to get back into the schools, and also just given that, COVID, this is our new normal moving forward. So we are brainstorming questions about where are youth using now, and also thinking about could they possibly like using Zoom and kind of interacting their friends in that way, or other different social medias that kids are using. So we are definitely brainstorming new questions, because some kids haven't been in school since March. They probably could possibly still be using e-cigarettes, but that's a good point there. That's just about their bedroom use.
So that's it for the questions so far. Is anybody, you can raise your hands on the chat, the Q&A, take them all. I think we answered that one. Done.
Give a thank you. More thank yous. Yeah.
I think it was very detailed and very, it was really easy to follow. So I think that's why it was so clear.
Thank you.
Well, great. If folks don't have any more questions, then Dr. Jackson, she's actually at another conference right now. So I think we'll probably let her get back to that. I see something from Heather Whipley about how we can work together. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to have follow up. Great talk, and also anyone who wants to meet with Asti, you could do it through Emily. I think she's met with a couple folks so far, but I believe she made herself available to other people.
Definitely.
Kind of talk.
Yeah. So Dr. Sussman asked another question. What do you think mediates a preference for alcohol flavors crossing vaping and drinking?
Yeah, so with the studies that's sort of about cigarettes, so combustible cigarette using, and also alcohol use as well. So I'm a nicotine researcher. I do think it's the nicotine, to be honest, but it's just that in that sample in 2015 that we used, we didn't assess nicotine very well. And so that is like one of my biggest things I'm kind of wanting to go back and look at and understand nicotine use. Because the other papers I saw that associate e-cigarette use to binge drinking, they don't specifically ask about were they using e-cigarettes in their nicotine. And we also know that there are publications that show that adolescents don't even know sometimes e-cigarettes have nicotine. So it's kind of a interesting situation, but I have preclinical work that's shown that nicotine and alcohol interacts on a molecular level to induce some of their positive effects and reduce their negative effects. So I strongly feel it's nicotine, but it's kind of hard to get at that when individuals don't know what they're using in their e-cigarettes. So that's one thing I want to do in the future, but I'm trying to figure out the best way to ask and find more informed users. But
Okay, so one more question from Julia Chensangi. What are your thoughts about how harm reduction through e-cigarette use might look like for African American smokers as compared to other groups?
This is why I wrote the grant. I wasn't actually sure. So the interesting thing about me and my trajectory looking at African American smokers is that I am Black, as you can probably tell, but I didn't come into tobacco research trying to do health disparities work. That wasn't my goal. I just wanted to do science. But just being at, SR&T conferences and realizing there's so many disparities. And I'm just like, why is this a thing? And so, because as an animal researcher, I had no idea about anything of what African Americans are using, or they most likely use menthol cigarettes. All these things are very new to me. And so it was just seeing that there was an issue and kind of jumping into it. So I'm not really aware what those what that would actually look like, and I'm not as informed about that. But I'm thankful that I got the K to actually learn more and dig deeper into this. But it's an issue, and it's just kind of, it's so blatant to me. And as a person, a part of that community, I can't not continue and just, I cannot be a part of the fight to actually get justice for Black people. But yeah, that's a good question, Julie. And actually, following you on Twitter, and I like your tweets, so we could definitely talk about this more, because I want to like glean from you as well. So I'm sure you know more based on how you answer the question. But thank you for the question.
So Jamie just asked the following question. Also wondering if you're thinking about extending to include other variables such as social context to menthol/apple and nicotine milligrams to assess liking.
Yeah, Jamie, I'm not, what do you mean by social context? I'm not exactly sure. Is that social networks, or is it?
Maybe she can clarify. I think I'll just.
She probably means societal context, like in the broad term. Never mind.
Being around friends, she says.
Interpersonal.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's a good point. So at that time of that survey, so it's an experimental survey, we didn't ask those type of questions. I think we need to definitely start asking more about friendships and relationships as well too. But we did assess, so another inclusion criteria for the study is that they did have to like menthol and like green apple flavor. So we did make sure they actually liked the flavors before they got into the study. So we didn't assume that that was a barrier, the reason why we saw these effects. But it's really, really important to look at other aspects, because we know that, you know, there's other things that play a role into it as well, but we did not assess that. I think it's important to look at social context as well.
Okay. Thank you from Jamie. Still open for questions if anybody has any more.
Well, I think maybe we'll wrap up, getting close to the hour. Thanks again. I'm sure there'll be more questions coming in, so you can email her at, as you can see, asti.jackson@yale.edu. But wonderful talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day, all.
You too.